So here we are at the State Line Outcrop with Bob, and we're really enjoying the Varve nature and thinking about what it would be like to fill in the Delaware Basin at the end with evaporites. The freshwater inlets get plugged up and the very top of the Delaware Basin fills up really quickly, maybe 268,000 years, because each Varve, and there's 268,000 of them, represents a year. And you can see all kinds of cyclicity and patterns, and it's just a really great outcrop.
And no fossils in this.
Too hypersaline. So we have alternating gypsum layers with calcite layers. The dark layers are the calcite, and they're the wetter times. And the white layers are the gypsum, and they're the drier times. So this way we can get, we're going for
lit and dark.
even light.
Tsunamis and all sorts of stuff. You could make up all sorts of stories. And they'll say, really? Really? I say, yeah. Yeah, let me tell you more. And then afterward you say, and then I got a bridge in Arizona I'll sell you. And about then they realize you're stupid. That said, you know, Estwing makes these little micro things like this. A little play out here with students is we spread out the teams of students along here and we say, find the one Varve that is representative of all the Varves. And when you look really close, you can't find one that's like that because they're all different thicknesses. At first glance, they look about the same, but when you start to look really close, they're highly variable.
Okay.
Are every year back to back the same? And the answer is no.
Some years are more warm, some years are a little bit cooler. So when you look here, you end up seeing the summer is the white, the winter is the dark. And so you can come here and you can get wonderful, absolutely wonderful samples here to take home. And in places like Houston, they'll slowly start to dissolve, unless you keep them inside. But in the guidebook, we've actually went and
So we're looking at the Seven Rivers Formation, and we're up dip from the grainstones. So we're now on our middle of the way to the evaporites, which are farther up dip. So we're in tidal flats. And this is something that brings us back to Jerry Friedman and all of the tidal flats we've looked at, where there's algal stromatolites, laterally linked stromatolites. There's evaporite molds, the famous vanished evaporites. There's layers of siltstone that are probably windblown, and possibly little algae that are sticky that kind of dissolve. And this whole package has a lot of algae in it. So it's getting tight. It's not a particularly good reservoir, but it's a real shallow water indicator.
Starting down here and coming up through the whole section, here's a measured section with all the cycles and exposure surfaces. And here's the teepee horizon right here. And we lose it up here, and all we see is just laminated thin little dolostone packages in here with some anhydrite and some siliciclastics mixed in, like right here. And then here's the Yates sandstone above, the big regional marker before seismic and before logs that everyone mapped and picked out and stuff. So this is just it. So there's the base of 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5 little cycles, and then the sand. And the rest of this is up here will be what people call the base of the Tansill, will be the top of this little cycle right like that. So here's a little measured section, and come out and spend a day doing this and a day doing Rocky Arroyo, and then we camped out on the ridge because the Stevens was filled and we couldn't get a room because it was back during the good days. And so that kind of didn't happen. But here's kind of the estimate of where the teepee horizon is right here, and somewhere right through about here there was an exposure surface. You don't see the sand in here at all. It had to be coming along this surface and then trickling down in like so. And we've made a lot of thin sections here, and we've done some petrography, but this is just kind of what it looks like up in the upper laminated interval. This is the porosity right here.
Wow.
Big rip up class. And let's see if I remember right. Yes, there's hanging cements because it was severely exposed. And this is the spot where we got the thin section, and here's the thin section right there. We'll walk over to that spot so you can see where it is, because we want to see the sandstone. We want to put our hand on the Yates, because different cycle of
So this is the Yates Formation on Dark Canyon.
So we'll come out of this. The big a mess here. And in May, you'll have to warn the student. We'll go over until we get here. There's the top. We're standing on the base, and some of it is oxidized red along here. You see the red along here. And if you look really close, you see holes forming, and those holes actually start out as rectangles because it's not normal marine water. The evaporites are just right back there, so it's saline water instead. And so it makes sense to see a few molds forming from the evaporite. Here's some right down in here too. They're all through there. The real important thing is finding the top when you're drilling, and then creating structure maps. And if you find a 25-foot Yates closure, that's all you need for deeper potential. And you just hope you've got reservoir with the seal, because this was really early exploration. And so back then they were going for, in the 20s, it was the anticlinal theory of oil accumulation. And so everyone was trying to map surface anticlines. Well, as they started to drill, they'd see this and say, hey, now we can map the subsurface. Let's get the data points and map them. And so you started to have landmen and the guys that are called scouts. And they go say, hey, we'll give you our Yates pick if you give us your Yates pick, so they can populate their maps better.
Yates sandstone.
Now, when I was in Oklahoma City, they used to drill geophysically stands out like a sore thumb, the top of the Yates. And it's a beautiful marker. So you always hang your stratigraphic seismic lines from the Yates, unless you want to go deeper. And then we would try to get down deeper if we were doing like a sequence strat study, and we're trying to go from the Balian scale to the actualistic scale. And I'm not sure. I want to see the Archaeolithoperella that encrusts all of this. Oh, here it is. Here it is right here. Okay, so this black stuff here is open space, and here's encrusting Archaeolithoperella all through here. So it's what holds and binds everything together. And so you'll have a sponge, you'll have an encruster like this, and this is just some of it right through here, like so.
And whenever you see a dark spot, this was actually a hole where something has dissolved away. That's probably the remnant of a sponge right there. And the darker areas are what have filled in later. Let's see. Yeah. And here's more Archaeolithoporella. So what we got here are sponges here, and then you don't have to go up very far to see the crinoids start to show up. They're just right up here, and these haven't transported very far at all. These guys have a lot of the stalk preserved still. And normally when they fall, they disarticulate and they get washed away, and they're full of tons of porosity to begin with. So they're really lightweight and they're easy to be moved by a current from point A to B. So the inference here is when they fall over, they must have been down in deep enough water that there weren't currents to rework this stuff. And so when we went up here, we got up to where we found these Mysia, this daisy-clad algae, and we figured that was wave base, and we came back here, and that put the sponges in about 120 feet of water. Best guess. And as you go up higher, you'll start to see gastropods and other organisms.
Okay, we're standing on the upper San
We're on
Andreas.
the upper San Andreas, and we're going to walk down to the top of the lower San Andreas. Then we're going to walk down in to the interval that separates the shoal part and the middle ramp part. We're going to go down to that interface and get a little low in, and then we'll go back up and look at maximum flooding, and then we'll come up to the top to the composite sequence boundary and look at it, and then we'll talk about the upper San Andreas a little bit, but this has no reservoir potential here. The reservoir potential is in the lower San Andreas here only. That's it. Up into here a little bit.
So what number is large?
And it's the basal most sandstone in the
Upper San Andreas.
The catch is when you go down dip and you get down the graver, the place where you get.
Okay, so this is the maximum flooding surface. He just told us that this is the maximum flooding surface, and that this is the below the maximum flooding surface, and then this is the low stand, I guess, on top of it. Here's a staff for scale.
Knock off pieces of and say, what kind of rock are you
And do you see some bioturbation and possibly some fossils here? And then a lot of erosion of porosity on the upper unit.
We have to lend them stuff.
So this is the San Andreas Formation. Okay, the San Andreas Formation in Lawyer Canyon. The student objective here would be to measure the section.
But that's 2,700 feet across.
And that's two-dimensional.
Yes.
Yeah,
Up dip. It's got one production well to basement to make sure you don't have other reservoirs that you don't know about.
So in every discovery, a basement test.
You want a basement test somewhere along the way. That's number one. Number two is as you develop the field, and if it's a carbonate reservoir, the wild hair is permeability. So you have to take cores, and you do 10 to 20%. And then you get your staff trained up
to do very detailed log correlations initially to get it, the reservoir zonated as properly as possible. Then you start describing the cores, and you cut the cores into the well logs to try to see what scale flow units are developed on. The whole idea with coming out here to the Permian Basin is to study basin strata, to look at the shelf margin, and to look at the back shelf as well. Now this part's eroded away. We don't get to see the evaporites back here. We see a little bit, but not much. But the whole idea is to walk through the strata and look at processes in the basin along the shelf margin, and then look at back shelf, these are big carbonate ramps down here, those processes. And then when you turn into a rimmed margin, what these processes look like here, and how you create reservoir potential for conventional reservoirs here and unconventional reservoirs out here that are actually mixed in with some conventional reservoirs out here as well, like Brushy Canyon turbidite fans of sand versus Wolfcamp shale and Bone Spring shale, other material like that. So that's the whole idea for coming out to this part of the world, is because what you see back here is actually mirrored in the subsurface in the Permian Basin. So if you find the right place, you find perfect analogs to the same stratigraphic interval. That's the beauty of this part of the world. So the Guadalupe Mountains and the outcrops of the Delaware Basin are textbook examples of what's in the subsurface, and it's a natural laboratory.
And Bob, in the few days we've spent together, one of the great appreciations that you've shared with us is how you take all of this and apply it to real problems in the subsurface.
Yes.
You looking at fields, doing the detailed event cycles, doing the sequence stratigraphy. What do you call it? Analytical?
Yeah, well, process sedimentology.
Process sedimentology, and measuring very detailed sections, correlating the detailed sections, because flow units matter in oil fields. And as we look at the world's greatest basins, of which the Permian Basin is the prototype, onshore, let's get it in there, super basin.
Yeah.
There are lessons here that can be applied, as you mentioned, globally.
Yeah.
So great outdoor classroom, great connection to the subsurface, and then the bigger picture, what can we take away? Oh, and do you want to say a word about Roz and the late tilt? Because that's a special thing here.
Yeah, because when you take a look at this whole area right here, instead of looking like this, it's actually tilted like that. And it went all the way back to El Paso, Texas. And so there's this huge area that brought a lot of water in to the shelf margin. And if you have connected debris flows, have actually pushed water down into the connected debris flows into the basin facies. And then some of the water has actually got into faults and fractures. And when they have moved, they've created this enormous amount of pressure that has actually injected some of the water into the source rocks and creates this weird looking stuff we call calcite beef. Because if you can get fluid inclusions in it, it tells you it's fresh water and it was hot. So it's also part of the ROZ story too. And the neat thing about this area is you had this huge recharge area, and then it rifted and pulled apart. So where the water had pushed the oil out of a structural closure, a lot of those closures had the chance, when that head of pressure went away, to resaturate and partially or completely refill up with mobile oil. And then a lot of them only partially filled up and left an ROZ at the base, but those actually resaturated a little bit, so the upper part of the ROZ is a play. So you come in and horizontal them and drop the pressure, and the mobile oil will start to migrate into the horizontal. It's really neat.
So getting more oil out of big fields that have already been found. And development geology is very critical. We think at a big scale, but we got to look at the development scale. And so one of the things that's amazing to me is the great canyons out here, and because this is a pretty dry area, you don't have that much vegetation.
No,
so
great
boy, if you wanted
exposures.
to see cuts, three-dimensional cuts into
This
the
is the
geometries,
place. Yeah.
so classic canyons,
Yeah.
connecting it all,
Yeah.
good stuff.
Otherwise, you couldn't do this.
Yeah.
You couldn't do that. You couldn't create these models, you know. And this is one that Charlie Cairns did. He gets all the credit in the world for this. And it's a great one to put on the front cover because you see the basin, the margin, and the back shelf.
Great.
It is perfect, you know.
Well, thank you, Bob. We've really enjoyed our time together.
It's my pleasure.
It's great to be with you.
Thanks.